So most people know that there's a civil war happening right now in Syria, and a terrorist group named ISIS has killed a bunch of people and attacked Paris and Brussels recently. But other than that, people don't really know a lot about what's actually happening in the civil war. So I'm going to give you the statistics first. The war started in 2011, and since then, around 400,000 people have been killed in the conflict. About 5 million more are refugees, 90% of them living in Turkey and Pakistan. In total, more than 50% of Syria's population, or around 12 million people, have fled the country. In trying to cross the Mediterranean to reach Europe, 4,000 refugees have drowned when their boats capsized. Joseph Stalin once said, "The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic." These are really big numbers I just mentioned, and they're kind of hard to understand. And maybe that's why for so long we've been able to ignore what's been happening in Syria, because those numbers don't feel like actual people. So for the past 5 years, Syria has been fighting a brutal civil war that started back in 2011 when the people decided that they had had enough of the oppressive Assad regime and decided to do something about it. Many started protesting the Assad regime and began demanding democracy. But Assad refused to step down and instead fought back the protesters with astounding violence and brutality, with acts like shooting protesters, torturing children, using chemical weapons against his own citizens, and running them over with tanks. Now obviously the Syrian people were furious at their government, and so they responded with violence themselves. The problem though was that there were so many different ideological and religious groups fighting for different reasons that they ended up fighting and hating each other as well. It's gotten so bad that most experts agree that Syria is now in the middle of a new genocide. The targeting of many different religious and ethnic groups were the main causes of most of the deaths. So my essential question is, what do we as an international community do about the situation in Syria? Well, right now, the US and Europe have declared war on ISIS, and we've done drone strikes and many military raids on places where we think ISIS might be. But some people in America and Europe call for even further military action against ISIS and even against the Assad government. They call for a full invasion of Syria to try to make a new country. But is this a good path forward? In the past, we tried invasion before, and more times than not, it's led to more bad than good. A few years ago, when we invaded Iraq, we were able to successfully topple Saddam Hussein's regime. But the lack of leadership and diplomacy on America's part was what led to the formation of ISIS in the first place. In the book The Kite Runner, the story takes place during a time when Russia invaded Afghanistan. In trying to get rid of the Russians, the US sponsored rebel militant groups to try to overthrow them. It worked, and the rebels took over Afghanistan. And that rebel group became known as the Taliban, and we all know how that turned out. Trying to settle this war by invasion is way too risky and not worth what it would cost. Unfortunately, right now, there's not much hope in finding a diplomatic solution to the war either. Because Russia backs the Assad government, we can't really go in there and mess things up, because we piss Russia off, and that'd be bad for all of us. Obviously, ISIS and the other extremist groups won't be willing to cooperate. And there are just so many different religious and ideological groups that there's very, very little chance of being able to unite them together to negotiate a peace. The reality is that America and Europe cannot solve the Syrian problem or change Syrian society. So what else can we do? Well, right now there are 5 million refugees out there that are looking for a home. You've probably seen the pictures of the sprawling refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey. These countries were not equipped to handle so many refugees coming in at once, so conditions there are bad, and the opportunities for those refugees are few. In many places, those camps are so underfunded and crowded that the people lack basic resources like food and water. The real solution is for more well-off countries like the United States and countries in Europe to come together and help. But instead, we become more divided and indecisive on what to do. We become paranoid and fearful of letting refugees in our country. And we become convinced that what's happening over there is their problem and that we should take care of our people first. But that's their problem mentality is incredibly destructive, because we have to come to realize that what's happening over there also affects us as well. For example, the chaos in Syria led to the growth of ISIS, which not only targets minorities in Syria, but Europeans and Americans as well. Like the assassination of an archduke in Austria was just an Austrian conflict, right? Until it became a Turkish conflict, and then a German conflict, and then a French conflict, and then a Russian conflict until the entire world was engulfed in a war. I'm not saying that the whole world is going to go to war because of Syria. What I am trying to say is that the world is sometimes more connected than we'd like to think. We have to stop pretending that these things don't affect us, and that it's okay for people to be suffering just because they're not living in our borders. Helping refugees isn't just a nice thing to do, it's our moral obligation. At the beginning of the year, we talked about moral choices and moral dilemmas. Right now, we are running down a track that is harming both the Syrian citizens and us as an international community. We are faced with the choice between allowing more people to suffer or become willing to help. It's our duty to flip that switch, to set ourselves on a path that makes these people's lives better. We need to keep in mind that we're writing history right now. Do we want to be remembered as racist, xenophobic bigots who hide behind our fences? Or do we want to be remembered as people who were willing to help out our people when they needed it the most? We have to come to realize that these people fleeing for their lives are no different than we are. Last year, a 29-year-old refugee named Amir and his family were finally accepted as refugees. They were offered the opportunity to move to Thailand, and since then, Amir has gotten a job and his children are now in school. When he was interviewed, he said, "Since I got my refugee status, I felt so free. Now my future is clear for my family, especially my kids." It's up to us to make this future clear for these people, and to help make sure that it is a good one. Thank you.